The diamond earrings caught the light perfectly under the jeweler's loupe. Richard Mason adjusted the magnification, studying each facet with the same intensity he'd once applied to construction blueprints. $15,000 was substantial even for him, but Sarah deserves something extraordinary for her wedding day. These earrings will be perfect for such a special occasion as a wedding. The salesperson said, her manicured fingers adjusting the velvet display. The woman had been patient with his examination, understanding that men of his generation approach such purchases methodically. Yes, my daughter's wedding. I want everything to be perfect. The words carried more weight than he intended. After losing Eleanor 10 years ago, moments like these reminded him how much he wanted to get right. Sarah had been through enough disappointments in her relationships. This time felt different with James. The boutique's classical music created a cocoon of refinement around them. Other customers moved quietly between displays, their voices hushed in reverence for the luxury surrounding them. Richard had built Mason Construction from nothing, and moments like this validated every difficult decision, every missed dinner, every weekend spent at construction sites instead of home. His phone buzzed against his chest pocket. He glanced at it absently, expecting another email about concrete deliveries or permit approvals. The message made his hands freeze above the jewelry case. Don't go to the wedding. Run. The number was unfamiliar. He read the message again, then a third time. His fingers tightened around the phone's edges. The diamonds blurred as his focus shifted entirely to the screen's harsh blue glow. Sir, is everything all right? You look quite pale. The salesperson's voice seemed to come from underwater, her concerned expression penetrating his confusion. He forced his breathing to steady. Just wedding nerves, I suppose. The lie came easily, a businessman's reflex to maintain composure under pressure. But inside questions multiplied like cracks in concrete under freeze-thaw cycles. Who would write something like this, and where did they get his number? He dialed the mysterious number. The phone rang endlessly, each tone amplifying his anxiety. No voicemail, no answer, just the mechanical repetition of connection attempts. He tried again immediately. Still nothing. The salesperson waited patiently while he completed the transaction. His signature on the credit card receipt looked shaky, uncertain. The gold pen felt foreign in his trembling fingers. She wrapped the earrings in tissue paper with practiced efficiency, placing them in the iconic Tiffany box with its perfect bow. I hope your daughter loves them, she said, handing him the small shopping bag. She will. The response was automatic. His thoughts remained fixed on the message, analyzing its implications, like a structural engineer examining foundation problems. Someone knew about the wedding. Someone wanted him afraid. He walked toward the mall's main corridor, clutching the Tiffany bag against his side. Other shoppers moved around him in blissful ignorance, while he scanned faces searching for threats he couldn't identify. The Mall of America's crowds, usually comforting in their anonymity, now felt oppressive. Every stranger could be watching. Every phone could be documenting his movements. The gift that had given him such satisfaction moments ago now felt like evidence of his vulnerability. Someone knew his plans, his schedule, even his phone number. They wanted him to run from his daughter's wedding. He needed coffee. He needed time to think. The small cafe near the food court beckoned with its promise of normality and caffeine. Perhaps in the familiar ritual of ordering and sitting, he could make sense of this disruption to his carefully ordered world. The coffee grew cold while he stirred it obsessively, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded him of concrete mixers. The Tiffany bag sat on the table beside his elbow, its presence both reassuring and mocking. $15,000 for earrings. And now someone was telling him not to give them to his daughter. Families occupied nearby tables, their children's laughter creating a soundtrack of normality he couldn't access. His phone lay face up on the table, its dark screen reflecting his anxious face. He checked it 17 times in the past hour, willing it to ring so he could demand answers from whoever had shattered his peaceful afternoon. The second buzz made him jump. Another message from the same unknown number. I'll explain everything later, but don't go home today. Trust me. His logical mind rebelled against following instructions from a stranger. 68 years of business experience had taught him to verify sources, demand credentials, require proof before making decisions. But something deeper, an instinct he'd learned to trust during decades of construction negotiations, whispered that he should listen. He dialed the number again. The endless ringing mocked his desperation for answers. Whoever was sending these messages had no intention of immediate communication. They were controlling the timing, forcing him to react rather than respond strategically. "Another coffee, sir." The young server appeared at his elbow, pot in hand, concern creasing her features. "Make it a double shot." The caffeine wouldn't help his nerves, but the familiar routine of ordering provided temporary anchor in the chaos of uncertainty. His reflection in the cafe window showed a man he barely recognized. The confident businessman who'd entered Tiffany an hour ago had been replaced by someone hunched over a phone, jumping at electronic sounds. Eleanor used to tease him about his need to control every variable in his environment. Now variables were controlling him. The Lincoln Navigator sat in the parking garage 3 levels down. He could drive home to his house in Minnetonka, pour himself a proper whiskey, and dismiss these messages as pranks or wrong numbers. Sarah's wedding was tomorrow evening. He had final preparations to oversee vendors, to confirm a father of the bride speech, to review one last time. Instead, he found himself dialing the Hilton Minneapolis downtown. "I need a room for one night." "Yes, for today." The reservation agent's efficiency impressed him. Within minutes, he had confirmation for room 815, a business-class accommodation with city views and high-speed internet. The decision felt both impulsive and inevitable. Something about that voice in his head, the one that had guided him through profitable real estate investments and away from problematic partnerships, insisted that trusting these mysterious warnings was the right choice. He deliberately avoided calling Sarah or James. Worrying them before he understood the situation would only create additional chaos. Better to spend one night in a hotel, gather information, and approach tomorrow's wedding with clarity rather than confusion. The drive downtown took 37 minutes through Friday afternoon traffic. He kept checking his rearview mirror, though he wouldn't have recognized surveillance if it existed. Construction sites and office buildings blurred past while he replayed the day's events, searching for patterns or explanations that remained frustratingly elusive. The hotel's valet took his keys with professional discretion. The lobby's marble floors and crystal chandeliers reminded him of the Tiffany store, another environment where money purchased comfort and service. He checked in using his credit card, accepted the key card, and rode the elevator to the 8th floor in silence. Room 815 felt enormous and sterile. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Minneapolis skyline, but the familiar landmarks provided no comfort. He unpacked his emergency overnight bag, hanging his spare suit in the closet with mechanical precision. The hotel room's silence pressed against his eardrums like deep water. He'd ordered room service, twice watched 3 news programs, and taken a shower that lasted 43 minutes. Nothing distracted him from the phone sitting on the nightstand. It screamed dark and accusatory. 7 attempts to call the mysterious number had yielded nothing but endless ringing. Whoever was behind these warnings controlled their communication completely. They would contact him when they chose, not when he demanded answers. The steak arrived perfectly cooked, accompanied by a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan that cost more than most people earned in a week. He signed the bill mechanically, tipping the room service waiter enough to ensure he wouldn't remember him as anything other than generous. "Just leave it on the table, thank you." His voice sounded hollow in the spacious room. The waiter's departure left him alone with his thoughts and growing paranoia. Outside the windows, Minneapolis glittered with Friday night energy. Couples walked hand in hand toward restaurants and theaters, living normal lives unburdened by cryptic warnings and unexplained fears. He envied their ignorance while nursing his whiskey, watching traffic patterns 8 floors below. The wedding was less than 20 hours away. Sarah would expect him at the venue by noon for photographs and final preparations. The banquet hall on the Mississippi River had cost him $47,000. Not including flowers, music, or catering, everything was arranged, confirmed, and paid for. Yet someone wanted him to run from it all. His phone showed 11:47 p.m. when he attempted his 8th call to the mysterious number. The familiar pattern of unanswered rings had become almost meditative, a ritual of frustration he repeated every hour like clockwork. At 11:50 p.m. the phone rang. He answered on the first ring, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hello, Richard. This is Thomas Williams. Sorry for the mystery, but I had to be certain." The voice hit him like recognition lightning. Thomas Williams, his former business partner, the man he'd trusted with half his company until his gambling addiction destroyed their partnership 8 years ago. They'd parted ways acrimoniously, lawyers mediating the dissolution of what had once been genuine friendship. Thomas, after 8 years, what's happening? The questions tumbled out before he could control them. Relief at finally having answers competed with confusion about why Thomas had contacted him through anonymous messages. Today I was at Lawyer Stevens' office for my aunt's estate matter. Thomas's voice carried the weight of someone delivering terrible news. Richard, I overheard something about your daughter's wedding. About you. The whiskey glass trembled in his free hand. Stevens was a prominent Minneapolis attorney, the kind who handled wealthy families' legal affairs with discretion and efficiency. What could Thomas have overheard that warranted cryptic warnings and hotel room isolation? What did you hear? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Not over the phone, too dangerous. Meet me tomorrow morning at the Guthrie Theater, the bridge overlooking the river. 10 o'clock, come alone. Thomas paused uncomfortably. And Richard, bring everything important. Papers, passwords, anything you'd need if you couldn't go home for a while. The line went dead before he could respond. He stared at the phone's blank screen, his reflection distorted in its dark surface. Outside Minneapolis continued its Friday night celebrations while he sat in an expensive hotel room, contemplating the destruction of everything he'd built. Tomorrow was supposed to be Sarah's wedding day. Instead, it might be the day he learned why someone wanted him to disappear. The phone's weight felt enormous in his grip as Thomas's voice echoed through the hotel room's silence. 8 years of separation melted away, leaving only the urgency in his tone and the dread building in Richard's chest. He stood up from the bed, pacing toward the window where Minneapolis sparkled below like scattered diamonds. Thomas, what exactly did you overhear? His voice sounded steadier than he felt. The businessman in him needed facts, specifics, evidence before accepting what his instincts already feared. I heard her saying the old man barely leaves the house anyway. We'll find witnesses about memory problems. Thomas's words struck like hammer blows. Richard, your daughter was discussing guardianship procedures with Stevens. She mentioned having you declared incompetent after the wedding. That's impossible. My Sarah would never. The protest died in his throat. He grabbed the hot-all notepad and pen, his hands shaking as he wrote down Thomas's exact words. The businessman's reflex to document everything kicked in automatically. I wish I was wrong, but I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. She and that fiancé of hers discussed it in detail. Thomas's voice dropped lower. James kept talking about the company's value, asking about business transfer procedures, something about moving assets before the competency hearing. The notepad slipped from his fingers. He sank into the desk chair, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. Room 815's luxury surroundings blurred as he processed the implications. His daughter, his own daughter, was planning to steal his life's work. What else did they say? The question came out as a whisper. Richard, I wouldn't call if I wasn't certain. Your daughter is planning to sell your business. Thomas paused uncomfortably. I saw them with legal documents. This isn't just talk, Richard. They have a timeline. He stood again, walked to the window, pressed his palm against the cool glass. The city below continued its Friday night celebrations while his world collapsed floor by floor. How could he have been so blind? Every concerned comment about his forgetfulness, every suggestion that he seemed tired, every offer to help with the business suddenly revealed itself as preparation for this moment. Thank you for warning me. The words felt inadequate. We had our problems, but I never forgot what you did for me early on. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. He poured a double whiskey with trembling hands, the Macallan burning his throat as memories cascaded through his mind. Sarah asking about insurance policies last Christmas. James's frequent questions about company valuation. Their recent conversations about his declining health despite his excellent physical condition. They mentioned having medical evaluations scheduled, Thomas continued, said something about Stevens knowing the right doctors, ones who would cooperate with the right diagnosis. The glass shattered against the hotel room's marble floor. He stared at the amber liquid spreading across expensive stone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. They had it all planned. The wedding was just a celebration before destroying his life. Thomas, I need to know everything. Every word you heard. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas recounted the conversation with devastating precision. Legal documents were already prepared. Medical professionals had been contacted. Financial advisors were standing by to liquidate assets. His daughter and her fiancé had orchestrated a comprehensive plan to steal everything he'd built over 40 years. He filled 3 pages with notes documenting every detail, like preparing for the most important business negotiation of his life, because that's exactly what this was. A fight for his company, his independence, his very identity. Richard, there's something else. Thomas's voice carried new weight. They mentioned it moving quickly after the honeymoon. Something about you having an episode at the wedding reception, becoming confused or agitated. They plan to use that as evidence. The hotel room felt like a trap. Tomorrow evening, he was supposed to walk Sarah down the aisle, smile for photographs, give a heartfelt father of the bride speech. Instead, he would be participating in the setup for his own destruction. He set down the phone and stared at his reflection in the dark window. A 68-year-old man looked back, but behind those eyes burned the same determination that had built Mason Construction from nothing. They wanted to destroy Richard Mason. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The broken glass crunched under his shoes as he paced the hotel room, his notepad filled with Thomas's devastating revelations. Sleep was impossible. His mind raced through 40 years of memories, re-examining every interaction with Sarah and James through this new lens of betrayal. His phone's photo gallery became a catalog of evidence he'd been too blind to see. Last Christmas dinner, there was James casually asking about the company's insurance policies. Sarah's birthday party in March, she'd mentioned his forgetful moments to 3 different relatives. Every family gathering now revealed itself as intelligence gathering. The digital clock showed 2:17 a.m. when he scrolled to a photo from Easter dinner. Sarah was whispering something to James while he carved the ham, both of them looking at him with expressions he'd interpreted as concern. Now he recognized them as calculation. How could he have been so blind? James always asked about the company's value, the real estate holdings, the machinery worth. Sarah lately mentioned his forgetful moments. So often he'd started wondering if he really was declining. Every casual comment about retirement, every suggestion that he seemed tired, every offer to help with business decisions, it was all preparation. He grabbed a fresh piece of hotel stationery and began documenting patterns. James's questions about company insurance last December. Sarah's comments about his confusion during their engagement party. Their frequent suggestions that he should consider slowing down, maybe think about transferring some responsibilities. The whiskey helped steady his hands as he wrote. Each revelation felt like discovering termites in a foundation he'd thought was solid. They'd been systematically undermining his credibility for months, maybe years, preparing witnesses for their eventual competency challenge. At 4:33 a.m., he found the photograph that made everything crystal clear. Sarah and James at his birthday party 2 months ago, both looking at their phones while he opened presents. In the background, barely visible, was a business card on the coffee table, Stevens' law firm. They had been planning this since before they announced their engagement. Dawn light crept through the hotel windows as he reviewed his notes. 23 instances of suspicious behavior, 14 questions about company finances, 7 comments about his supposed memory problems. The pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. Maybe he really had started seeming like a burden to them. The doubt crept in despite the evidence. James was young, ambitious, probably saw an old man standing between him and financial security. Sarah had always been practical, perhaps too practical. When had love for her father become an obstacle to overcome? Every family dinner, every casual question about retirement, every concerned look, it was all preparation for today's revelation. They'd turned his own daughter into an executioner, and she'd accepted the role willingly. The phone rang at 6:18 a.m., room service confirming his breakfast order, coffee, eggs, Benedict, fresh fruit. The normality of the conversation felt surreal against the backdrop of family betrayal. He had eaten thousands of business breakfasts over 4 decades, but this morning he was preparing for war against his own blood. He showered methodically, choosing his most conservative business suit. Today required every advantage, including the psychological armor of professional appearance. In the mirror, he saw not a vulnerable old man, but a seasoned negotiator preparing for the most important deal of his life. The checkout process took 8 minutes. He paid cash for incidentals, maintaining financial discretion. If Sarah and James were tracking his movements, they'd find gaps. Downtown Minneapolis was awakening as he drove toward Stevens' office building. Early commuters filled coffee shops and lobbies, beginning another ordinary Friday. None of them knew that Richard Mason was driving toward confirmation of his daughter's betrayal. The elevator to Stevens' law firm rose smoothly past 14 floors of Minneapolis's professional elite. He'd been in this building dozens of times over the years, negotiating contracts and reviewing legal documents. Today felt different. Today he was an investigator, seeking evidence of his own destruction. Stevens's receptionist recognized him immediately. "Mr. Mason, how nice to see you. Are you here for the Jacobson contract review?" "Actually, I'd like to speak with Robert about my will. I'm curious about some other legal matters my daughter mentioned." The waiting room's leather chairs and mahogany tables exuded expensive competence. Financial magazines fanned across side tables their headlines about market trends and investment strategies. He'd built his wealth following advice from publications like these. Now he was fighting to keep it from his own family. "Richard, wonderful to see you." Robert Stevens emerged from his office, hand extended in professional greeting. Tall, distinguished, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer wealthy Minneapolis families trusted with their most sensitive affairs. His office overlooked the Mississippi River floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the same waterway where tomorrow's wedding reception was scheduled. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Robert, I want to review my will, and who else has been asking you similar questions?" He settled into the chair across from Stevens' desk, adopting the casual tone of friendly curiosity. Stevens paused, his professional smile flickering slightly. "Well, your daughter was interested in guardianship procedures. Said she was worried about your health, wanted to understand the legal options if—" "I see. What documents did she request?" The question came out sharper than intended. He softened his tone. "She mentioned something about protective measures forms for incompetency, declaration requirements for medical evaluations." Stevens pulled a file from his desk drawer. She seemed very thorough about understanding the process. His hands remained steady as he accepted the photocopied documents. Page after page of legal procedures for stripping someone of their independence. Medical evaluation requirements. Asset transfer protocols. Guardianship appointment processes. It was a complete roadmap for destroying someone's life. "How thorough. She's always been detail-oriented." The comment masked his horror at seeing the plan laid out so systematically. "Did she say anything about timing?" Stevens hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing one client with another, even family. "She mentioned wanting to understand the process thoroughly before any medical decline became apparent. Translation: before they manufactured evidence of his incompetence." "And James, was he part of these discussions?" "Your daughter's fiancé had many questions about business transfer procedures, asset protection during legal proceedings." Stevens flipped through his notes. He seemed quite knowledgeable about corporate valuation methods. The room felt arctic despite the morning sunlight streaming through windows. They'd done their homework. Legal procedures, medical requirements, business valuation, asset protection. Every aspect of their theft had been researched and prepared. "Robert, I'd like copies of everything related to guardianship law. For my own understanding, of course." He pulled out his wallet, extracting $500 bills. "And I'd prefer to handle this transaction privately." Stevens accepted the cash without comment, making photocopies of relevant statutes and procedures. Professional discretion was part of his service, especially when paid in untraceable currency. 20 minutes later, he walked toward the parking garage with a manila envelope full of evidence. Legal documents outlining exactly how his daughter planned to steal his life's work. Medical evaluation procedures they would use to declare him incompetent. Asset transfer protocols for liquidating Mason Construction. The Lincoln Navigator's engine purred to life as he sat in the parking structure, reading through the papers one more time. Everything Thomas had told him was confirmed in black and white. His daughter and her fiancé had orchestrated a comprehensive plan to destroy him, and they'd scheduled it to begin immediately after their honeymoon. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Richard Mason would be a passive victim. They had no idea that the man who'd built a construction empire from nothing was about to remind them exactly what he was capable of when threatened. The familiar weight of his house keys felt foreign as he unlocked the front door at exactly noon. The manila envelope containing Stevens's documents remained hidden in his briefcase alongside the Tiffany bag that had started this nightmare 20 hours ago. He hung his jacket on the designated hook with deliberate normality, setting his briefcase beside the hall table. "Dad, where were you?" "We were worried sick. You didn't answer your calls." Sarah rushed from the kitchen, her face a perfect mask of concern. Behind her, James emerged more slowly, his eyes studying Richard's face for signs of confusion or weakness. "I went to a hotel. Couldn't sleep at home, before the wedding." He let his voice trail off, projecting mild embarrassment rather than the cold rage burning in his chest. "Sometimes the house feels too quiet since your mother passed." James's eyes sharpened. "That's somewhat unusual, Richard. Maybe you should talk to a doctor about sleep problems." His tone carried practiced sympathy, but Richard caught the calculating gleam beneath. "Yes, Dad, we're concerned about you. Lately you seem forgetful." Sarah touched his arm with manufactured tenderness. "You left your phone here. We tried calling all night." "Did I? How silly of me." The performance required every ounce of his business experience, play the part they expected while gathering intelligence for his counterattack. "Have either of you seen my keys? I could have sworn I put them." He made a show of checking the hall table, his jacket pockets, even looking under magazines. The keys were in his hand the entire time. Sarah and James exchanged the kind of significant look that confirmed everything Thomas had told him. They were documenting his episodes for future medical evaluations. "Right here, Dad?" Sarah pointed to the obvious location on the counter. "You set them down when you came in." "Of course. Thank you, sweetheart." He smiled gratefully while his mind cataloged their reactions. James had pulled out his phone, probably making notes about his confusion. Sarah was watching his hands for tremors, his eyes for signs of disorientation. He moved to the kitchen and began his usual tea ritual, the familiar motions providing cover while he listened to their whispered conversation near the living room entrance. "Getting worse," James murmured. "The evaluation next week will confirm it," Sarah replied. "Good thing we have Stevens's paperwork ready." They had already scheduled his mental competency evaluation. The trap was closing faster than he'd imagined. "Dad, why don't you sit down? You look tired." Sarah guided him toward his favorite armchair like he was an invalid. "James and I can handle the wedding preparations." "Actually, I wanted to discuss something important." He settled into the chair, adopting the tone of a man seeking advice from younger, more capable family members. "I've been thinking about the company lately. What will happen when I'm too old to manage everything?" Both of them leaned forward with predatory interest. "Don't worry about that now, Richard." James's voice carried false reassurance. "We'll help you when the time comes." "But what if something happens to me? What if I become unable to make decisions?" He let vulnerability creep into his voice. "I trust both of you completely, but I worry about the complexity of the business." "Dad, you don't need to worry about any of that." Sarah's eyes gleamed with poorly concealed excitement. "James has been studying your contracts, your client relationships. We understand the business better than you think." "Really, you've studied my contracts?" He feigned surprise while mentally recording her admission. "That's very thoughtful, but some of those arrangements are quite complex." "Actually, I've identified several opportunities for consolidation," James interrupted. "Your company could be much more profitable with proper management. I even know potential buyers who are ready to pay exceptional prices." The audacity was breathtaking. They were so confident in their plan that James was openly discussing selling his life's work. He sipped his tea and nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of an aging businessman grateful for young expertise. His phone buzzed with a text message. Both Sarah and James watched intently as he fumbled with the device, deliberately holding it at the wrong angle and squinting at the screen. "Having trouble reading it, Dad?" Sarah asked with false concern. "These screens are so small." He handed her the phone. "Could you tell me what it says?" The message was from Thomas. "Everything okay? Stay strong." "Just a spam message." Sarah lied smoothly, deleting the text before handing back his phone. They were already controlling his communications. He stood slowly, stretching his back with theatrical discomfort. "I think I'll rest before tonight's rehearsal dinner. This has been an exhausting day." "Good idea, Dad. You need your strength for tomorrow." Sarah kissed his cheek while James watched from across the room, probably timing how long his confusion episodes lasted. He walked toward his study, his footsteps deliberately unsteady. Behind him, he heard them begin another whispered conference about his declining condition and their accelerated timeline. The study door closed with a soft click, finally giving him sanctuary to drop the performance. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, but this time it was rage, not confusion, that made them tremble. The study's familiar walls provided temporary refuge from his performance of decline. He activated his phone's recording app, testing the audio quality by tapping the desk and whispering test phrases. Clear sound, no distortion, perfect for capturing Ersu confessions. His business instincts took over as he planned the evidence collection strategy. Sarah and James believed they were dealing with a confused old man. That perception was now his greatest weapon. They would speak freely around someone they considered mentally compromised. He slipped the phone into his shirt pocket, microphone positioned upward, and returned to the living room where they continued their whispered planning session. "Feeling better, Dad?" Sarah looked up from a stack of papers they'd been reviewing. Papers that definitely weren't wedding-related based on the legal letterhead he glimpsed. "Much better. Actually, I wanted to continue our conversation about the company." He settled back into his chair, adopting the tone of someone seeking reassurance. "Sometimes I think I'm getting too old for business. What will happen to the company when I can't handle the complexity anymore?" James leaned forward eagerly. "Don't worry, Richard. Sarah and I will help. I've studied all your contracts, the Morrison project, the Henderson development, even the equipment leasing arrangements with Caterpillar." The casual mention of specific contracts stunned him. Those files were locked in his office safe. How would James access them? "You know about the Henderson development?" He let his voice sound impressed rather than alarmed. "That's very complicated. The environmental permits already reviewed them," James said proudly. "Plus the profit projections, the timeline for completion, everything. You've built an incredible company, but it could be even more profitable with proper management." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Dad, maybe you should work less. We'll take care of everything. You've earned a rest." "Could you really manage such a large company?" He made his voice sound both hopeful and doubtful. "Of course, I even know buyers who are ready to pay a very good price. Consolidated Construction has been interested in your client list for years. They've offered $47 million for the whole operation." His blood turned to ice. $47 million was roughly 60% of the company's actual value. They were planning to sell his life's work at a devastating loss, probably taking a substantial finder's fee for themselves. $47 million, he repeated slowly, as if trying to process the number. "That sounds like a lot of money." "It is, Richard. Enough to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life." James's patronizing tone made him want to throw him through the window. "Sarah and I would handle all the business details. You could relax, maybe do some traveling." "Where would I travel?" he asked with the innocent curiosity of someone whose world was shrinking. "Somewhere warm," Sarah suggested. "Maybe a nice assisted living community in Arizona. They have excellent facilities there." Assisted living. They were planning to warehouse him in some institutional setting while they looted his assets. The phone in his pocket captured every word of their casual discussion about destroying his independence. "That sounds lovely." He smiled vacantly while imagining their eventual imprisonment. "But what about my house? I've lived here for 35 years. "Don't worry about the house, Dad. We'll handle selling it." Sarah's voice carried the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "These decisions are too complex for you to worry about anymore." James pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. "Actually, I should call the evaluation specialist. Dr. Roberts said he could move your appointment to Tuesday if necessary." Dr. Roberts. They'd already arranged for his mental competency evaluation with a specific doctor, probably one they'd bought or pressured. The timeline was accelerating beyond even Thomas's warnings. "What evaluation?" he asked with perfectly feigned confusion. "Just a routine checkup, Dad. Dr. Roberts specializes in age-related cognitive changes." Sarah's euphemism was almost elegant. "We want to make sure you are healthy." "That's very thoughtful." He stood slowly, shuffling toward the kitchen for more tea. "You two are such good children, taking care of everything." Behind him, he heard James dialing Dr. Roberts' number. The phone in his pocket captured every word as he discussed moving his cognitive evaluation to Tuesday morning, 2 days after the wedding. They weren't even waiting for the honeymoon to begin their assault. The kitchen provided perfect acoustics as he prepared another cup of tea with deliberately shaky hands. Their conversation carried clearly from the living room. "Tuesday works perfectly," James said into his phone. "Yes, the family is very concerned about his declining condition. Memory problems, confusion, difficulty with complex decisions. No, he won't resist. He trusts us completely." The water boiled as Sarah added her voice to the planning. "We should have the guardianship papers filed by Wednesday. Stephen said the court date could be as early as Friday if we present compelling medical evidence." 1 week. They were planning to strip away his independence, sell his company, and institutionalize him within 1 week of their wedding day. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also their fatal mistake. They had revealed their entire timeline, their methods, even their corrupt doctor's name. He returned to the living room carrying his tea, with both hands the picture of elderly frailty. "I couldn't help but overhear, you're arranging a doctor's appointment for me. Just to check up, Dad." Sarah's smile was radiant with false affection. "We love you so much. We want to make sure you're properly cared for." The recording app continued capturing evidence as he nodded gratefully, playing the role of a trusting father while his mind calculated the precise nature of their eventual downfall. They wanted to prove Richard Mason was mentally incompetent. Tomorrow at their wedding reception, they would discover exactly how sharp his mind really was. Monday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that only comes after sleepless planning. Richard had spent Sunday reviewing every recorded conversation, organizing documents, and preparing his counterattack with the methodical precision that had built Mason Construction from nothing. Today was execution day. The drive to his office took 23 minutes through morning traffic. He carried 2 briefcases, one with the usual business documents, another with evidence that would destroy his daughter's future. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was driving to save his company from his own blood. His assistant Margaret, whom he'd named after Eleanor's favorite aunt, looked up from her computer with professional concern. "Mr. Mason, I didn't expect you today. Isn't Sarah's wedding this weekend?" "Saturday evening, but I have some urgent business to handle first." He unlocked his office door, already planning the morning's delicate operations. "Margaret, could you clear my schedule until noon? I have some sensitive calls to make." The first call went to Blackwood Investigations, a firm he'd used for employee background checks. "Nathan, this is Richard Mason. I need comprehensive financial background checks on 2 individuals, James Frazier and Dr. Elliot Roberts." "Yes, I'll pay the rush charges." Within an hour, Nathan called back with devastating information. "Mr. Mason, we've completed the preliminary investigation. Mr. Frazier has gambling debts totaling $342,000 to 3 different casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. The most recent is from 6 weeks ago. Regarding Dr. Roberts, he's been investigated twice for insurance fraud, though never convicted. The medical board has him on a monitoring program due to complaints about diagnosis irregularities, particularly with elderly patients." Richard felt his jaw tighten. "Any connection between Frazier and Roberts?" "Interestingly, yes. They attended the same charity golf tournament last month, sponsored by the Consolidated Construction Group. We found a photograph of them together in the event's social media posts." Consolidated Construction, the company that had supposedly offered to buy Mason Construction. The web of conspiracy expanded beyond his imagination. "What about Stevens, the attorney? Any connection to us?" "Robert Stevens sits on the board of that same charity. All 3 men appear in several photographs together." Richard thanked Nathan and ended the call, adding these new revelations to his notes. His daughter had chosen her conspirators poorly, but the coordination was more sophisticated than he'd initially thought. This wasn't just Sarah and James's plan. The plot appeared to involve a practiced network of professionals who specialized in separating vulnerable elderly people from their assets. The second call was more personal. "Margaret, I know this is short notice, but I'd like to invite some additional family members to Sarah's wedding. Could you help me contact them?" "Of course, Mr. Mason. Who should I call?" "My sister Veronica in Phoenix, brother Michael in Chicago, all the cousins. I want the whole family there." He paused. "This will be a very special celebration. They shouldn't miss it." Margaret's efficiency impressed him as always. Within 2 hours, she'd contacted 37 relatives across 6 states. Most were shocked by the last-minute invitation, but family loyalty trumped inconvenience. They would all attend. The third call required more delicate handling. Thompson Audiovisual. This is Richard Mason. I'm hosting a large family event this Saturday and need professional sound equipment. Yes, wireless microphones and mixing board speakers powerful enough for 200 guests. Money is no object. What kind of event, Mr. Mason? A wedding reception. But I also want to give a very important speech. The whole family needs to hear every word clearly. By Wednesday afternoon, his trap was set with precision that would have impressed a military strategist. The venue had been expanded to accommodate 60 additional guests. Professional audio equipment was scheduled for delivery Saturday morning. Dr. Roberts' fraudulent background was documented. James's gambling debts were verified and photographed. Most importantly, he'd contacted Lawrence Chen, Minneapolis's most respected elder law attorney, to draft new legal documents. Chen arrived at Richard's office precisely at 2 o'clock on Wednesday, carrying a leather portfolio and an air of scholarly competence. His reputation for protecting elderly clients from financial exploitation was unmatched in Minnesota. Mr. Mason, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. If what you've told me is accurate, this is one of the more elaborate elder exploitation schemes I've encountered. Chen spread several documents across Richard's desk. The coordination between your daughter, her fiancé, the doctor, and the attorney suggests this may not be their first attempt at such a maneuver. What are my options? Richard asked, maintaining the business-like demeanor that had served him through decades of negotiations. I've prepared several documents for your immediate protection. Chen handed him the first set of papers. This is a new will that explicitly excludes your daughter and her husband-to-be from any inheritance. It leaves your estate to the Minneapolis Children's Hospital, with specific language stating that any attempt to challenge your mental competency would trigger an automatic fraud investigation. The document's legal language was precise and unforgiving. Richard signed it with steady hands. This second document is a revocable trust that places your business assets under the protection of 3 independent trustees, none of whom have connections to Stevens Roberts or Consolidated Construction. Chen passed another document across the desk. It includes explicit instructions regarding any attempts to force a sale or transfer of Mason Construction. Richard reviewed the trust documents carefully before signing. And if they proceed with their plan, regardless, Chen's expression turned grim. This final document authorizes me to file criminal charges for conspiracy, attempted fraud, and elder abuse should they pursue any competency challenge against you. He handed over the final papers. I've also prepared a detailed brief for the Minnesota Medical Board regarding Dr. Roberts' suspicious pattern of competency determinations. Richard signed every page with meticulous care. How quickly can you execute these if necessary? Within hours. I've already prepared the filings in case of emergency. They need only your final authorization. Chen gathered the signed documents. Mr. Mason, I must ask, are you certain you want to pursue this course? These actions will permanently destroy your relationship with your daughter. Richard stared out the window at the Minneapolis skyline, the city where he'd built his life and company. Mr. Chen, my daughter destroyed our relationship the moment she decided my life's work was simply an asset to be liquidated and my independence an obstacle to be removed. I'm not pursuing vengeance. I'm pursuing justice. Chen nodded solemnly. I understand. Just know that once these events are set in motion, there's no turning back. My daughter left me no path for retreat. Richard extended his hand. Thank you for your assistance. After Chen departed, Richard sat alone in his office, considering the weight of the decisions he'd made. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk, mirroring the dark intentions that had invaded his family. He'd spent a lifetime building structures, businesses, a family. Now in his late 60s, he found himself planning an elaborate destruction. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Thomas. Richard, I checked into Consolidated Construction like you asked. They've been targeting family-owned businesses across the Midwest, specifically those with aging owners. 4 companies in the past 2 years, all following the same pattern: a medical diagnosis of incompetence, a quick guardianship hearing, then a below-market sale. They use a rotating cast of doctors and attorneys, but it's the same scheme. And Stevens, is he involved regularly? In 2 previous cases, he specializes in wealthy clients with strained family relationships. What about my daughter and James? How deeply are they involved? Thomas hesitated. Richard, there's no easy way to say this. James has worked with Consolidated before as a finder. He identifies vulnerable business owners with alienated family members, then positions himself. The implication was unmistakable. You're saying he deliberately pursued my daughter to get to my company. The timing lines up. He started dating Sarah 6 months after Consolidated's last acquisition. I'm sorry, Richard. Your daughter may be as much a victim as you are. Richard ended the call and closed his eyes, processing this new information. The possibility that Sarah was being manipulated complicated his feelings, but didn't change his course of action. Whether she was a willing conspirator or an unwitting accomplice, the threat to his company and independence remained the same. Thursday brought a conversation with Sarah that confirmed his resolve. She entered his study while he reviewed financial projections for the Henderson development. Dad, you've been so busy since the weekend. Is everything okay with the company? He noted the calculated concern in her voice, the way her eyes scanned his desk for signs of confusion or distress. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just finalizing some contracts before taking time off for your wedding. You work too hard. She perched on the edge of his desk, the picture of daughterly concern. James and I were thinking that after the honeymoon, maybe you should consider stepping back a bit, letting us help with the day-to-day operations. Actually, I've been thinking about your wedding gift. He closed the financial folder, watching her face carefully. The earrings are beautiful, Dad. You don't need to give us anything else. Actually, I want to give a speech at the reception, a proper father of the bride speech about family trust and the future. He smiled with paternal warmth while watching her reaction. I've invited some additional family members too. Aunt Veronica, Uncle Michael, all the cousins. This should be a celebration the whole family remembers. Sarah's face went pale. But Dad, we planned an intimate ceremony. Nonsense, this is my daughter's wedding. I want everyone to witness this momentous occasion. He patted her hand affectionately. Don't worry about the cut. I've already expanded the venue and arranged for professional audio equipment. Everyone will hear my speech perfectly. James appeared in the doorway, obviously having overheard their conversation. Richard, maybe a smaller gathering would be less overwhelming for you. Overwhelming, this is the happiest day of my life. He stood and embraced them both with theatrical emotion. My daughter is marrying a wonderful man. The whole family will be together, and I get to share my thoughts about love, loyalty, and what family really means. What will you say in your speech? Sarah asked weakly. Oh, I have so many stories to tell. About trust between family members, about honesty, and relationships, about people who pretend to care while planning betrayal. He smiled benevolently. Don't worry, dear. I've been preparing for weeks. It will be a speech no one ever forgets. James gripped Sarah's arm, both of them recognizing the threat they couldn't identify. Their wedding, intended as a celebration before Richard's destruction, was about to become the stage for their public humiliation. The whole family will be there. James's voice carried barely controlled panic. Everyone important, Richard confirmed cheerfully. Aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates, even some old friends I haven't seen in years. We'll have nearly 200 guests to witness this special day. He walked to the window overlooking his garden, where Eleanor had planted roses before her illness. Saturday evening, in front of everyone who mattered, he would prove that Richard Mason's mind was sharp enough to destroy anyone foolish enough to betray him. The trap was set, the audience was confirmed, the evidence was prepared, and all that remained was the execution. Friday's rehearsal dinner unfolded with excruciating tension beneath the surface of celebration. Richard played his role perfectly, the proud father occasionally showing signs of confusion or forgetfulness, giving Sarah and James false confidence in their plan, while gathering final evidence for his counterattack. After the dinner, as guests departed the upscale downtown restaurant, Richard deliberately left his speech notes on the table. Sarah quickly retrieved them, scanning the handwritten pages with growing alarm. The notes contained only innocuous platitudes about marriage and happiness, nothing revealing his true intentions. Another layer of misdirection in his elaborate strategy. Dad, these notes are lovely, she said, the relief evident in her voice. Such beautiful sentiments about marriage. Thank you, sweetheart. I want everything to be perfect tomorrow. He accepted the notes back with a grateful smile, noting how quickly she'd examined them. The fear in her eyes had diminished, replaced by renewed confidence in their scheme. As they walked to their cars, James placed a solicitous hand on Richard's elbow. "Richard, you seemed a bit disoriented during dinner. Are you feeling all right?" "Just wedding jitters, I suppose." He allowed a slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his car keys. "I'm not as young as I used to be. These late nights are harder than they once were." "Perhaps I should drive you home," James offered, the concern in his voice, masking predatory calculation. "No, no, I'm perfectly fine." Richard fumbled slightly with his keys, providing another episode for them to document. "The restaurant is only 10 minutes from home. I'll take it slowly." Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with James. "Dad, we've noticed you getting confused more often lately. It's nothing to be embarrassed about, but we worry. Your concern touches me truly." He embraced his daughter, wondering how the child he'd raised could become so calculating. "Tomorrow will be perfect, I promise. Your mother would be so proud." He drove home alone, rehearsing his speech one final time, not the innocuous version Sarah had seen, but the devastating revelation he would actually deliver. Tomorrow would permanently alter the course of their lives. The thought brought him no joy, only grim determination. At home, he made a final call to Lawrence Chen, confirming that the legal documents were ready to be filed first thing Monday morning. Then he contacted Thompson Audiovisual to verify the equipment setup scheduled for early Saturday. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. As he prepared for bed, Richard paused before Eleanor's photograph on his nightstand. "You always said Sarah was too much like me, too focused, too determined." "You were right, my love. I just never thought she'd turn those qualities against me." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect June day for celebration. Richard dressed meticulously in his custom-tailored suit, checking his appearance with critical eyes. Today required perfect control, impeccable timing, and unwavering resolve. He placed the diamond earrings in his breast pocket alongside a USB drive containing all the recorded evidence of Sarah and James's betrayal. He arrived at the Riverview Banquet Hall precisely at noon for the pre-wedding photographs, greeting early arriving family members with practiced warmth. His sister Veronica embraced him tightly, genuinely happy to be included in the celebration, despite the short notice. "Richard, you look wonderful. How are you holding up?" "Sarah must be so excited." "We're all looking forward to this very special day," he replied, the double meaning hidden beneath his smile. The photography session proceeded with excruciating politeness. Richard posed beside Sarah in her wedding gown, the picture of paternal pride, while his mind calculated the hours until her exposure. James joined them for family portraits, his arm around Sarah possessively, both of them occasionally glancing at Richard with concern when he deliberately hesitated or appeared momentarily confused. The ceremony itself was beautifully executed, flowers, music, the traditional procession. Richard walked his daughter down the aisle with dignified steps, fighting the complex emotions that threatened his composure. Despite everything, some part of him mourned the relationship they'd once had, the trust that had been irrevocably broken. As he placed Sarah's hand in James's, he leaned close and whispered, "I've always wanted your happiness above all else." The statement was true, though not in the way she understood it. True happiness couldn't be built on betrayal and theft. The lesson she would learn today would be painful but necessary. Throughout the ceremony, he maintained his composure, playing the role of proud father while mentally reviewing each step of his counterattack. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the guests applauded, unaware of the drama that would unfold at the reception. Richard clapped politely, his eyes fixed on the newly married couple, measuring their confidence, their obliviousness to the reckoning that awaited them. The reception venue had been transformed into an elegant celebration space, white linens and crystal glassware gleaming under chandeliers. Richard verified the audio equipment during a brief moment alone, confirming that the wireless microphones and speakers were perfectly positioned for maximum impact. Thompson's technicians had followed his instructions precisely. As guests began arriving for the reception, Richard circulated among them, greeting family members he hadn't seen in years. Many expressed surprise at the last-minute invitation, but all seemed delighted to be included in such an important family event. Uncle Richard? His nephew William approached with a cocktail in hand. "Quite the elaborate celebration. Sarah looks beautiful." "Indeed she does. Marriage is such an important commitment, built on honesty, trust, mutual respect." Richard sipped his water, declining anything stronger. Today required absolute clarity. "I'm so glad the whole family could be here to witness it." Across the room, he observed James in intense conversation with a distinguished older man he recognized from Blackwood's investigation, Victor Harrington, CEO of Consolidated Construction. Their presence together at the wedding confirmed everything Thomas had discovered. This wasn't just about Sarah and James. It was an orchestrated corporate takeover disguised as a family matter. Dr. Roberts had also arrived ostensibly as a family friend, though Richard knew his presence served a more calculated purpose. The doctor would be watching for any signs of confusion or disorientation, building his case for Tuesday's evaluation. Richard deliberately knocked over a water glass when Roberts was observing, providing another incident to document. Dinner service began at 6 o'clock, the banquet staff moving efficiently among tables with plates of prime rib and salmon. Richard ate sparingly, maintaining focus on the timing of his revelation. The traditional toast began after the main course, the best man's humorous anecdotes, the maid of honor's tearful reminiscences. The wedding coordinator approached with a gentle tap on Richard's shoulder. "Mr. Mason, whenever you're ready for your father of the bride speech. I'll speak after dessert, if that's all right. I want everyone's full attention." As dessert was served an elaborate three-tiered cake that Sarah had selected months ago, Richard prepared his materials. He transferred the audio files to his phone, synchronized the device with the venue's sound system, and placed the manila envelope containing Stevens's documents on the table beside him. The cake-cutting ceremony proceeded with traditional sentimentality, Sarah and James feeding each other small bites, smiling for photographs, accepting congratulations. They looked genuinely happy, Richard noted with a pang of regret for what might have been. Had they truly loved each other before Consolidated Construction entered the picture? Or had James targeted Sarah from the beginning, recognizing her as his path to Mason Construction? The question was ultimately irrelevant. Their actions, not their motivations, had determined today's outcome. As coffee was served, the wedding coordinator nodded to Richard. The moment had arrived. He stood slowly, accepting the wireless microphone with steady hands. Conversations gradually quieted as guests noticed the father of the bride preparing to speak. Expectant faces turned toward him with warm anticipation of traditional wedding sentiments about love, family, and future happiness. Instead, they were about to learn what happened when someone betrayed Richard Mason. "Dear friends and family," his voice carried clearly through Thompson's professional sound system, reaching every corner of the elegant reception hall. 200 faces turned toward him with warm expectation. Champagne glasses raised in anticipation of traditional wedding toasts about love and happiness. Today is indeed a special day, a day of truth, of family, of discovering who people really are when they believe no one is watching. He smiled benevolently while Sarah and James exchanged confused glances beside him. "As father of the bride, I want to share some important revelations about marriage trust and the sacred bonds between family members." Aunt Veronica beamed proudly from her table, clearly expecting heartwarming stories about Sarah's childhood and hopes for her future. Uncle Michael raised his champagne glass in preparation for the traditional toast. None of them anticipated witnessing the destruction of everything they thought they knew about their family. "Marriage requires absolute honesty between partners." Richard continued, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. "It demands loyalty, respect, and the kind of trust that allows two people to build a life together. Unfortunately, some people view marriage differently, as an opportunity for financial gain rather than emotional partnership." The crowd murmured appreciative agreement while Sarah's smile began to falter. James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sensing something dangerous in Richard's tone, but unable to identify the threat. "Before I share my hopes for the newlyweds, I think everyone should understand exactly what kind of partnership we're celebrating today." He connected his phone to the audio system, watching the connection icon appear on screen. "I recently discovered some interesting conversations between my daughter and her new husband." Silence fell across the reception hall like a heavy curtain. 200 guests leaned forward with sudden attention, sensing drama about to unfold. At the head table, Sarah gripped James's arm with growing panic. "Dad, what are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "Sharing the truth, sweetheart. Isn't that what families do?" He pressed play on the first recording. James's voice filled the hall with devastating clarity. "The old man won't understand the business complexity anymore. We'll sell everything and live beautifully while he drools in some nursing home." Gasps echoed throughout the reception hall. Guests stared in shock at the head table where James's face had gone completely white. Sarah covered her mouth with trembling hands as her own voice emerged from the speakers. Dad barely leaves the house anyway. We'll find witnesses about his memory problems. This is what my dear children planned, Richard announced with calm precision. To declare me mentally incompetent, steal my company, and lock me away in assisted living while they liquidated 40 years of my life's work. Chaos erupted across the reception hall. Family members stood up from their tables shouting questions and accusations. Aunt Veronica's face showed pure horror as she processed the evidence of her niece's betrayal. Uncle Michael slammed his champagne glass on the table, the amber liquid splashing across white linen. This is all a misunderstanding, James shouted, rising from his chair with desperate aggression. Richard's confused. He's mixing up conversations. Let me clear up any confusion, Richard replied, producing the manila envelope from his pocket. These are legal documents my daughter requested from lawyer Stevens. Guardianship procedures, incompetency declarations, asset transfer protocols, a complete roadmap for destroying someone's independence. He held up page after page of evidence, while guests stared in stunned silence. The happy wedding celebration had transformed into a courtroom where judgment was being delivered with businesslike efficiency. Furthermore, he continued, I discovered that James has gambling debts totaling $342,000 to multiple casinos. Their plan was to sell my $78 million company for $47 million, keeping the difference to pay his creditors. Sarah stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. Dad, please stop this. You're ruining everything. No, Sarah. You ruined everything the moment you decided my life was less valuable than your ambition. His voice remained steady despite the emotion churning inside him. I also discovered that Dr. Roberts, your chosen evaluator for my mental competency assessment scheduled for Tuesday, has been investigated twice for insurance fraud and is currently under medical board supervision. More gasps and horrified whispers swept through the crowd. Several elderly relatives stood up and walked toward the exit, unable to stomach the revelation that family members could plan such betrayal. Therefore, Richard announced with finality, I changed my will yesterday. My estate now goes entirely to Minneapolis Children's Hospital. My daughter and her husband will inherit nothing except the consequences of their greed. He turned to face Sarah directly. I brought you something else besides these earrings. He placed the Tiffany box on the table. This was meant to be your something blue. Now it's simply a reminder of everything you lost when you decided your father's life was negotiable. Sarah collapsed into her chair, wedding makeup streaming down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Dad, please. We can explain everything. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Richard set down the microphone and looked across the reception hall, where half the guests were already gathering their belongings to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending what was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, you've witnessed justice. The elaborate wedding reception dissolved into chaos as family members chose sides, some defending Sarah despite the evidence, others expressing outrage at her calculated betrayal. Crystal glasses shattered on marble floors as arguments erupted between relatives who'd come to celebrate love and discovered conspiracy instead. Richard stood at the head table watching the destruction of his family while feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. Justice had been served with the same precision he'd once applied to construction contracts. Richard Mason had proved his mental competency beyond any possible doubt. The wedding was over. The reckoning had begun. As Richard prepared to leave, Thomas appeared at his side. You did what needed to be done. Not everyone would have had the courage. Courage had nothing to do with it, Richard replied quietly. This was business protecting 40 years of work from predators who happened to be family. Thomas nodded, understanding. What happens Monday? Lawrence Chen files the new will and trust documents. The medical board receives evidence of Roberts' pattern of suspicious diagnoses. Stevens receives formal notification that any competency challenge will trigger fraud charges. Richard straightened his tie, adjusting his professional armor, and I returned to running my company alone but intact. Across the room, he saw James in heated conversation with Victor Harrington. The Consolidated Construction CEO was clearly furious at the public exposure of their scheme. Whatever finder's fee James had been promised, was now evaporating before his eyes, along with any pretense of a loving marriage. She was a pawn too, wasn't she? Richard asked softly, watching his daughter weeping at the head table abandoned by her new husband in the midst of crisis. To some degree, Thomas confirmed, though she made her choices with open eyes. The question is, what will she choose now? Richard considered the question as he walked toward the exit. The afternoon sun streamed through the banquet hall windows, illuminating the wreckage of what should have been a joyous occasion. Outside, his car waited to take him home to an empty house filled with memories of better times. "Mr. Mason." A quiet voice stopped him at the door. He turned to find Dr. Roberts, his expression a mixture of defiance and fear. "You've made a terrible mistake," the doctor said, his voice low and threatening. "We were only trying to help. Your condition will deteriorate, and then you'll regret today's performance." Richard stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Roberts, by Monday afternoon, the Minnesota Medical Board will receive evidence of your involvement in 4 separate cases of suspicious competency determinations, all resulting in business liquidations benefiting Consolidated Construction. Your license won't survive the investigation." The doctor's face paled. "You can't prove anything." "I already have." Richard smiled coldly. "Blackwood Investigations is very thorough. Your career ended the moment you agreed to participate in this scheme." He left the doctor standing speechless in the doorway and continued to his car, the weight of the day's events settling around his shoulders. The victory had been necessary but brought no joy. His family was fractured possibly beyond repair. His daughter's future was uncertain. His own life stretched before him, professionally secure but personally bereft. As he drove home through the quiet Minneapolis streets, Richard reflected on the choices that had brought them all to this moment. He had built his business with unwavering determination, often at the expense of family time. Had he somehow taught Sarah that profit mattered more than people? Had his own example created the daughter who could so easily betray him? The questions had no easy answers. What remained certain was that Richard Mason had protected his life's work from those who would destroy it. The price had been devastating, but the alternative was unacceptable. Sometimes justice required sacrifice. Sometimes protection demanded destruction. He pulled into his driveway as evening shadows lengthened across the manicured lawn. Eleanor's rose garden bloomed with early summer color, a reminder of gentler times and simpler relationships. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine an alternate reality where Sarah had truly loved James, where their marriage celebrated genuine commitment rather than calculated convenience, where Richard himself grew old, surrounded by grandchildren who valued his wisdom rather than measuring his assets. The fantasy dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Reality demanded acceptance, not wishful thinking. He entered his empty house, removing his tie and jacket with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would bring practical concerns, changing locks, securing documents, preparing for the inevitable backlash from Consolidated Construction and their allies. Tonight, however, allowed a brief moment of mourning for the family that might have been. The phone rang as he poured himself a modest whiskey, not for celebration, but for momentary comfort. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. His finger hesitated over the screen. What could possibly be said after such public exposure? What words could bridge the chasm that had opened between them? After 5 rings, he answered. "Sarah." "Dad?" Her voice was raw from crying. "What you did today, it wasn't necessary. We could have discussed this privately. The way you privately discussed having me declared incompetent, the way you privately planned to institutionalize me while selling my company." His tone remained calm despite the renewed anger her denial ignited. "Some betrayals forfeit the right to privacy." "James was behind most of it," she said, desperation edging her voice. "He convinced me you were declining, that you needed protection from yourself." "He had examples, evidence." "Manufactured evidence," Richard interrupted. "And you believed it because it served your interests. The Sarah I raised would have come to me directly with concerns not conspired behind my back." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recriminations and regrets. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "You have 48 hours to remove your belongings from my house. After that, you're on your own, financially, emotionally, completely." Richard swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the fading light. "The diamonds are yours to keep. Consider them payment for a valuable business lesson. Never underestimate an opponent, especially when that opponent is your father." "Dad, please." "Goodbye, Sarah." He ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. Outside his window, the Minneapolis skyline glittered in the gathering darkness. The city where he'd built everything that mattered to him and lost what should have mattered most. The victory had been necessary, the justice undeniable, but the cost remained incalculable. Richard Mason had won, and in winning had lost something irreplaceable. The reception hall emptied with remarkable speed as family members fled the wreckage of what had been intended as a celebration. Abandoned champagne glasses and half-eaten wedding cake covered tables like debris from an emotional explosion. Crystal stemware lay shattered on marble floors where heated arguments had erupted between relatives forced to choose sides in an impossible family civil war. "Dad, you have to listen to us," Sarah sobbed, her elegant wedding gown stained with tears and spilled wine. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. We were trying to protect you." James paced behind her like a caged animal, alternating between rage and pathetic desperation. "You ruined everything. We could have all been wealthy. Instead, you've destroyed our future for some twisted sense of revenge." Richard remained seated at the head table, calmly organizing his documents while they raged. The professional audio equipment still amplified their voices across the nearly empty hall, broadcasting their desperation to the few remaining witnesses who hadn't fled in disgust. "Protect me by declaring me incompetent and selling my company for 60% of its value, by scheduling medical evaluations with fraudulent doctors, by planning to warehouse me in assisted living while you spent my money paying James's gambling debts. We love you." Sarah dropped to her knees beside his chair, mascara streaking her face like war paint. "Everything we did was because we care about your health." "Love." Richard repeated the word like a foreign concept. "You documented my supposed confusion episodes. You researched guardianship procedures. You contacted potential buyers for my business." "That's an interesting definition of love." Aunt Veronica approached from across the hall, her face grim with determination. "Richard, I owe you an apology. We should have seen what was happening. Sarah's behavior these past months, the questions about your health, the comments about your memory. You couldn't have known. They were very careful, very systematic. Professional predators disguised as loving family." Uncle Michael joined her, his normally gentle demeanor hardened by disgust. "Richard, you did the right thing. This kind of betrayal, it's unforgivable. They planned to steal your life's work and destroy your independence." James spun toward the remaining family members with desperate fury. "You're all fools. Richard's lost his mind. Can't you see he's imagining conspiracies that don't exist?" "We heard the recordings," Aunt Veronica replied coldly. "We saw the legal documents, your own voices confessing to the plan." Richard stood slowly, gathering his briefcase and walking toward the exit with measured dignity. Behind him, Sarah's sobs echoed through the sound system, while James continued his increasingly frantic denials. Their wedding reception had become their public trial and conviction. "Where are you going?" Sarah called after him desperately. "Home. You have 48 hours to collect your belongings from my house." He paused at the hall's entrance, looking back at the daughter he'd loved more than his own life. "After that, you're on your own. Time to discover what independence really means." "Dad, please. We're family. Family doesn't try to destroy each other for money." The words came out harder than he'd intended, but they carried the finality of a business contract. Family protects and supports each other. You chose a different path. James made one last desperate attempt at negotiation. "Richard, we can work this out. The company needs young leadership. You don't understand modern business practices." Richard walked back to where James stood, studying his face with the cold assessment he had once reserved for dishonest contractors. "James, I built a $78 million company from nothing. I understand business practices better than you'll ever comprehend. What I failed to understand was the depth of human greed." The few remaining wedding guests filed out silently, some pausing to offer Richard support, others too shocked by the family drama to make eye contact. The elegant reception hall that had cost $47,000 now looked like a battlefield, strewn with the casualties of betrayal. Thomas appeared at the exit, having watched the entire revelation from the back of the hall. "Richard, you did what needed to be done. Sometimes love means saying no to the people who matter most." "Thank you for the warning, Thomas." Without your courage, they would have succeeded. Maybe old partners really do need to look out for each other, he replied with a sad smile. The drive home was silent, Richard's thoughts as empty as the dark road stretching before him. The Lincoln Navigator's familiar leather seats offered no comfort tonight. 40 years of building a company, a family, a legacy, and in one evening he'd been forced to demolish a significant part of it. The irony wasn't lost on him. The master builder had become a destroyer. His house stood dark and quiet when he arrived, the motion-activated lights illuminating the driveway as he pulled in. He'd lived here for 35 years, raised Sarah here, built a life with Eleanor until cancer took her. Now he would live here alone, the rooms echoing with memories of happier times and the recent betrayal that had poisoned everything. Richard entered through the kitchen door, setting his keys on the counter with mechanical precision. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that his daughter and her husband had plotted against him here, probably in this very room. How many conversations had they held about his decline while he prepared dinner for them? How many text messages had they exchanged about his company's value while sitting at his table accepting his hospitality? He poured himself a small whiskey and carried it to Eleanor's garden, visible under landscape lighting. The early summer roses were in full bloom, their scent carrying on the night air. He settled onto the stone bench they'd placed together 20 years ago. "You'd be so disappointed in her, Eleanor," he said softly to the empty garden. "Where did we go wrong? Was I too focused on the business? Did you shield me from seeing who she really was?" No answers came from the silent flowers. Only memories of Eleanor pruning her roses while explaining to a young Sarah the importance of cutting away diseased growth to protect the healthy plant. A lifetime ago, a different family, a different world. Richard finished his whiskey and returned inside, too exhausted for further reflection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight required rest. He slept fitfully, waking several times to phantom sounds, a door closing, footsteps in the hallway, Sarah's voice calling for him. Each time he found the house silent and empty, his subconscious still processing the day's events. By dawn, he'd given up on meaningful rest, rising to make coffee and begin planning his next steps. The doorbell rang at 7:42 a.m., in an unusual hour for visitors. Through the peephole, he saw James standing on his porch looking disheveled and desperate. Richard considered ignoring him but decided against it. Better to end this cleanly and completely. "James?" He opened the door but blocked the entrance. "I believe I gave Sarah 48 hours to collect her belongings. You weren't mentioned." "Richard, please. You have to listen." James's eyes were bloodshot, his wedding suit rumpled. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt you." "A misunderstanding?" Richard leaned against the door frame, keeping his voice even. "Like accidentally recording your plan to have me declared incompetent, or mistakenly researching guardianship procedures, or coincidentally meeting with a Consolidated Construction to discuss selling my company." "It wasn't like that," James insisted. "Consolidated approached me, not the other way around. They said they had concerns about your cognitive state, that Sarah needed to protect both you and the company. And your gambling debts, were those also a misunderstanding?" James flinched. "That's personal. It has nothing to do with this." $342,000 in casino markers seems very relevant when you're planning to sell my company at a $20 million discount. Richard straightened, his patience exhausted. "We have nothing further to discuss. Any communication should go through Lawrence Chen, my attorney." "Sarah's devastated. She spent the night crying in our hotel room." "That was her choice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." Richard began closing the door. "Victor Harrington wants to meet with you," James blurted, desperate to keep the conversation going. "Consolidated is still interested in acquiring Mason Construction. They're willing to offer $60 million now." Richard paused, then laughed without humor. "You still don't understand, do you? This was never about money. It was about respect, independence, and family loyalty, three concepts apparently foreign to you. Goodbye, James." He closed the door firmly and returned to his coffee, troubled by James's appearance, but not surprised. The young man was scrambling to salvage something from the disaster of yesterday. His finder's fee from Consolidated was evaporating. His new marriage was in tatters, and his reputation in Minneapolis business circles would be poisoned by the story spreading through the family grapevine. Desperation was to be expected. Richard's phone rang as he reviewed his notes for Monday's meeting with Lawrence Chen. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, Thomas. You're up early for a Sunday. I wanted to check on you. Yesterday was intense." "I'm fine." Richard sipped his coffee, appreciating his old partner's concern. "Just planning next steps. James showed up at my door this morning trying to salvage the deal. Said Consolidated is now offering $60 million. Thomas snorted. "They're getting desperate. I've been making some calls. Word is spreading through the industry about their tactics. Two other families they targeted are now reviewing their situations. You may have started an avalanche, Richard." "Good. Predators should be exposed." Richard paused, considering his next question carefully. "Have you heard anything from Sarah?" "No, but my wife ran into her college roommate at the grocery store this morning. Apparently, Sarah checked into the downtown Marriott alone last night. James didn't go with her." The information settled like a stone in Richard's stomach. Despite everything, part of him still cared what happened to his daughter. Interesting. Their partnership seems to be dissolving as quickly as it formed. What did you expect? It was a business arrangement disguised as a marriage. Perhaps. Richard stared out the window at Eleanor's garden, wondering if his wife would have found a way to salvage something from this disaster. She had always been better at forgiveness than he was. "I need to go, Thomas. Thank you for checking in." He ended the call and returned to his preparations for tomorrow's legal filings. The company needed protection from future attempts at hostile takeovers. The trust Chen had created would provide that security, but Richard wanted to review every detail one final time. The hours passed in focused work, Richard's business mind fully engaged in securing his company's future. By mid-afternoon, he had compiled a comprehensive strategy for reinforcing Mason Construction's independence, including a succession plan that would eventually transfer leadership to trusted employees rather than family members. A text message from Margaret interrupted his concentration. "Just heard about yesterday. So sorry, Mr. Mason. Please let me know if you need anything at all." News traveled fast in Minneapolis. By tomorrow, everyone in his professional circle would know what had happened at Sarah's wedding. Richard texted back a simple, "Thank you, Margaret," and returned to his work, pushing aside thoughts of the personal humiliation Sarah must be feeling. She had chosen this path. Now she would walk it alone. The doorbell rang again at 4:17 p.m. Richard approached cautiously, checking the peephole to find Dr. Roberts on his porch, looking considerably less confident than at yesterday's wedding. "Dr. Roberts," Richard said as he opened the door, "twice in 2 days. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Mr. Mason, may I come in? I believe we need to talk." The doctor's voice carried none of yesterday's threatening tone. Richard considered refusing, but decided he was curious what had prompted this visit. Briefly, he stepped aside, allowing Roberts into the foyer, but no further. "I have work to do. I understand you have been in contact with the medical board." Roberts stood awkwardly in the entrance, his professional demeanor cracked by evident anxiety. "Not yet, but first thing tomorrow morning, they'll receive a detailed report about your pattern of questionable competency evaluations. Lawrence Chen is quite thorough." Roberts swallowed hard. "I'd like to propose an alternative approach." "I'm listening." Richard crossed his arms, maintaining a businessman's neutral expression. "I have detailed information about Consolidated Construction's operations, their targeting methods, their network of professionals, their corporate structure. I'm willing to provide everything in exchange for discretion regarding my involvement." Richard studied the doctor's face, reading the desperation behind his professional facade. "You're offering to turn on your associates to save yourself. I'm offering valuable intelligence that could protect other families from what yours experienced." Robert straightened, attempting to reclaim some dignity. "I was wrong to participate in their scheme. I see that now." "Your sudden attack of conscience is remarkably well-timed," Richard observed dryly. "What exactly prompted this change of heart? Victor Harrington cutting you loose?" Roberts winced. "Something like that. After yesterday's exposure, Victor made it clear I was on my own. My arrangement with Consolidated is terminated." Richard considered the offer. The information could indeed prove valuable, both for his own protection and potentially for others targeted by Consolidated. But the principle of letting Roberts escape consequences troubled him deeply. "Here's my counteroffer," Richard said finally. "You provide everything you know about Consolidated to Lawrence Chen tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Every name, every method, every previous victim. In return, I'll consider your cooperation when deciding whether to file a formal complaint with the medical board. Consider, Roberts frowned. That's not much of a guarantee. It's the only offer you'll get. Richard moved toward the door. Your choice, doctor. Cooperate fully and possibly salvage some portion of your career or face certain investigation with no consideration for assistance. Roberts hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll bring everything. Chen's office, not mine. And doctor, if you are thinking of warning Consolidated, remember that Blackwood Investigations is still monitoring communications between all parties involved. Richard opened the door. Good afternoon. After Roberts departed, Richard returned to his home office contemplating this new development. The doctor's defection could provide valuable insight into Consolidated's operations, potentially exposing their entire network of elder care exploitation. That would be a satisfying expansion of yesterday's victory. His phone rang again, Sarah's number. Richard stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the accept button. After 4 rings, he answered. Yes, Dad. Her voice sounded raw, exhausted. I need to see you. I believe I made myself clear yesterday. You have until tomorrow evening to collect your belongings. Anything after that will be donated to charity. This isn't about belongings. She paused, then continued with evident effort. I have information about Consolidated Construction that you should know, and explanations you deserve to hear. Richard felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the wariness of a businessman being presented with a too convenient offer. What information? Not over the phone, please, Dad. One conversation face to face. After that, if you still want me gone from your life, I'll respect your decision. He considered refusing maintaining the clean break he'd established yesterday, but his business instincts recognized the value of intelligence from an insider, even one who had betrayed him. In some deeper part of him, the father who remembered Sarah's first steps, her graduation, her wedding day, wanted one final opportunity to understand how things had gone so catastrophically wrong. 7 o'clock. Here. Come alone. He ended the call before she could respond, already questioning his decision. The next 3 hours passed slowly, Richard alternating between reviewing business documents and staring out the window at Eleanor's garden. What would his wife have advised? Would she have seen potential for reconciliation? Where he saw only tactical advantage, Eleanor had always been his moral compass, balancing his pragmatic business sense with her compassionate perspective. Without her, he felt adrift in these emotional waters. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Richard opened the door to find Sarah standing alone on the porch wearing jeans and a simple blouse rather than yesterday's wedding gown. Her face was makeup-free, eyes red from crying, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked younger, vulnerable, more like the daughter he remembered than the calculating woman who had plotted his downfall. Thank you for seeing me, she said quietly. Richard stepped aside wordlessly, allowing her into the house. He led her to the living room but remained standing, maintaining physical and emotional distance. You mentioned information about Consolidated. Sarah nodded, sitting carefully on the edge of the sofa. Yes, but first I need to explain something about James. I'm already aware he's worked with Consolidated before identifying vulnerable business owners with family members they could manipulate. Richard remained impassive. Thomas discovered that yesterday. Did he tell you James approached me first? That our entire relationship was constructed specifically to gain access to you and Mason Construction? Richard's carefully maintained composure faltered. What are you saying? We met at a charity gala 18 months ago. He sought me out, knew exactly who I was, who you were. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the evident pain behind her words. Everything was calculated from the beginning. Which restaurants we visited, which friends we spent time with, even the timing of our engagement. All designed to establish a relationship that would give him access to you. And you discovered this when 6 months ago. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. We were already engaged. I found emails between James and Victor Harrington discussing their acquisition strategy for Mason Construction. Richard processed this information, his mind assembling the timeline. Yet you proceeded with the wedding plans. You participated in researching guardianship procedures. You discussed having me declared incompetent. You were fully complicit. Yes. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. When I confronted James about the emails, he didn't deny anything. Instead, he showed me financial projections for what we'd gain from the deal with Consolidated. $47 million, Dad. More money than I could imagine. So you chose money over loyalty. I chose security, she countered. James convinced me you were already showing signs of cognitive decline, forgetting appointments, making business errors, becoming confused about details. He had documented incidents, dates, witnesses, manufactured evidence. Richard's voice hardened. I see that now, but then I believed him. And once I started watching for these incidents myself, I started seeing them everywhere because I was looking for them, expecting them. Sarah leaned forward earnestly. He manipulated me, Dad. Not that it excuses what I did, but it explains how I got from being your daughter to what I became. Richard remained silent, processing her explanation. The manipulation she described was sophisticated, leveraging her existing concerns about his age and playing on her financial insecurities. It aligned with the pattern Thomas had discovered in Consolidated's other operations. You said you have information, he prompted, finally unwilling to acknowledge her explanation directly. Sarah nodded, reaching into her purse and removing a USB drive. Everything I could download from James's laptop. Emails, financial records, their entire targeting methodology. Lists of professionals they work with in different cities, previous victims, ongoing operations. James left his computer in our hotel room last night. He never came back after the reception. Richard took the drive, turning it over in his hands. Why give me this? Because what they're doing is wrong. Because other families shouldn't experience what we're going through. And because, she paused, her composure cracking slightly, because I hope it might be the first step toward earning back some small measure of your respect, if not your forgiveness. You understand this doesn't change anything between us. I understand. She stood, gathering her purse. I've already packed my things from upstairs. They're in my car. I won't be coming back tomorrow. Richard walked her to the door, maintaining his emotional distance despite the conflicting feelings her explanation had stirred. At the threshold, she turned to face him one last time. I know I've lost the right to ask anything of you, but I hope you'll use that information to stop them. Not just for yourself, but for everyone they're targeting. I will. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting him since yesterday. Did you ever actually love him? Or was that part of the calculation too? Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. I thought I did. Now I don't know what was real and what was manipulation. I'm not sure I'll ever know. She walked to her car without looking back, leaving Richard standing in the doorway of the home they'd once shared as a family. He watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then closed the door on the life that had ended yesterday in a banquet hall filled with shattered crystal and broken trust. Monday morning arrived with renewed purpose. Richard drove to Chen's office, the USB drive, secure in his briefcase, alongside the documents they prepared for filing. The attorney greeted him with professional courtesy, offering coffee and a status update. Dr. Roberts arrived at 8:45, quite eager to cooperate. He's provided extensive documentation on Consolidated's operations, including names of attorneys, doctors, and financial advisors in their network. Quite the enterprise they've built. Add this to your collection. Richard handed over Sarah's USB drive. My daughter provided this last night. According to her, it contains Consolidated's entire operational methodology, past targets, and current prospects. Chen raised an eyebrow. Your daughter turned against her husband, ex-husband. I imagine, though, the marriage barely lasted 24 hours. Richard sipped his coffee, maintaining his businesslike demeanor. She claims James manipulated her from the beginning, that their relationship was engineered specifically to gain access to me and my company. Do you believe her? The evidence on that drive will tell us. If her story aligns with Roberts' information and what Thomas discovered, it lends credibility to her claim. Chen nodded, inserting the drive into his computer. We'll analyze everything and prepare a comprehensive strategy. In the meantime, I've filed the trust documents securing Mason Construction. Your company is protected regardless of what happens next. Excellent. What about the medical board filing? Ready for your signature. However, given Roberts' cooperation, perhaps we hold that in reserve for now. If his information proves valuable, we maintain leverage by keeping the threat active rather than filing immediately. Richard agreed with a tactical approach. And Stevens, any communication from his office? Nothing yet, but it's early. I suspect they're in crisis mode this morning, strategizing damage control. Consolidated won't abandon this pursuit easily. You've embarrassed them publicly and threatened their entire business model. Good. Richard leaned forward, his expression hardening. I want to expand our approach. Beyond protecting Mason Construction, I want to dismantle Consolidated's elder exploitation operation completely. Use Roberts' information. Sarah's drive everything we have. Contact the families they've already victimized, connect with regulatory authorities, whatever it takes. Chen smiled slightly. Going on offense rather than defense. I appreciate the approach, though it will escalate the conflict considerably. I built my company by recognizing when a defensive posture was insufficient. This situation requires decisive action. Richard stood, straightening his suit jacket. Keep me updated on what you find on that drive. I'm heading to the office to reassure my management team that Mason Construction remains stable despite the weekend's events. At Mason Construction headquarters, Richard found his employees already buzzing with rumors about Saturday's dramatic reception. Margaret met him at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and professional restraint. Mr. Mason, everyone's wondering what happened. The executive team has requested an emergency meeting. Schedule it for 10 o'clock in the main conference room. I'll address everyone directly. Also, Victor Harrington from Consolidated Construction called 3 times this morning. He insists it's urgent. Richard smiled coldly. I bet he does. Tell him I'm unavailable indefinitely. Any communication should go through Lawrence Chen's office. The executive meeting proved straightforward. Richard explained the situation candidly, sharing enough details about Consolidated's attempted hostile takeover to clarify the situation without embarrassing Sarah unnecessarily. He emphasized the company's stability, the new trust structure protecting their operations, and his continued leadership. Mason Construction remains exactly what it has always been: independent, profitable, and focused on excellence, he concluded. The events of this weekend were unfortunate, but have ultimately strengthened our position in the marketplace. I expect business as usual from everyone. The executive team responded with unanimous support, several expressing outrage at Consolidated's tactics. By noon, Richard had restored confidence throughout the organization and was returning to his normal workflow when his private line rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Richard Mason. Mr. Mason, this is Victor Harrington. The voice carried forced joviality. I believe it's time we spoke directly businessman to businessman. Mr. Harrington, I was wondering when you'd bypass my assistant. Richard leaned back in his chair, his voice deceptively casual. Unfortunately, I have nothing to say to you. Any communication should go through my attorney. That's unnecessarily adversarial. We had a simple misunderstanding that's been blown out of proportion. Harrington's tone remained smooth, practiced. I'm prepared to offer $80 million for Mason Construction, well above market value. The fact that you're still attempting to acquire my company after Saturday's events tells me everything I need to know about you and Consolidated. Richard's voice hardened. Let me be perfectly clear. Mason Construction is not for sale. Not for $80 million, not for $100 million. Not to you, not to anyone. Everyone has a price, Richard. I'm simply trying to find yours. Some things aren't for sale, Victor. My company, my independence, my family's legacy, these things have value beyond your financial calculations. Richard tightened his grip on the phone. Now, instead of discussing acquisitions, perhaps you should focus on the multiple investigations about to be launched into Consolidated's business practices. A pause, then. What investigations? The ones based on the extensive documentation provided by your former associates, Dr. Roberts and James Frazier. Fascinating reading. I imagine regulatory authorities will find it equally interesting. Harrington's smooth facade cracked. You're bluffing. Roberts wouldn't dare, and Frazier knows which side his bread is buttered on. Both men provided comprehensive information about Consolidated's elder exploitation operations. Names, dates, methods, previous victims. Everything. Richard allowed himself a small smile. When your schemes collapse, Mr. Harrington, your associates tend to save themselves rather than maintaining loyalty. A design flaw in your business model. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Harrington's voice turned threatening. I have connections throughout Minneapolis banking, real estate, government. I can make things very difficult for Mason Construction. And I have evidence of systematic elder fraud, financial exploitation, and conspiracy that I'm prepared to share with the FBI, state authorities, RCs, and every media outlet in the Midwest. Richard's tone remained even. Shall we see whose leverage proves stronger? The silence stretched for several seconds before Harrington responded. What do you want? Complete dissolution of Consolidated's Elder Services Division. Full restitution to all previous victims. Public apology and admission of your tactics. And your personal resignation from Consolidated's board. That's outrageous. You're asking for corporate suicide. No, I'm offering an alternative to criminal prosecution. Your choice, Victor, transformation or destruction. Either way, your predatory business model ends today. Another long silence. I'll need to consult with my board. You have 48 hours. After that, Lawrence Chen releases everything to authorities. Richard ended the call without waiting for a response, satisfied with having seized the initiative. The rest of the day passed in productive work, Richard fully engaged in the business operations that had defined his professional life. By evening, he felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in months, the satisfaction of direct action and decisive leadership. The emotional turmoil of the weekend remained, but the businessman in him had found solid ground again. At home that evening, Richard reviewed the day's developments while preparing a simple dinner. Chen had called with preliminary analysis of Sarah's USB drive, confirming it contained exactly what she'd claimed, Consolidated's complete operational playbook. Combined with Robert's testimony, they now possessed devastating evidence against Harrington and his organization. Thomas called as Richard was finishing his meal. I hear you've put Harrington in a vice grip. The business community is already whispering about trouble at Consolidated. News travels fast. Richard carried his wine to the living room, settling into his favorite chair. In this case, I may have helped it along a bit, Thomas admitted. I've been having coffee with some old contacts, sharing carefully selected details about Saturday's events. Spreading the word about Consolidated's tactics. Exactly. Several families with aging patriarchs have already contacted Chen's office, concerned they might be on Consolidated's target list. You've started something significant, Richard. Good. Their predatory approach needs to end. Richard sipped his wine, considering his next words carefully. Sarah came to see me last night. Brought a USB drive with Consolidated's entire operation documented. Claims James manipulated her from the beginning. Thomas was silent for a moment. Do you believe her? The evidence supports parts of her story. The timing of her relationship with James aligns with Consolidated's pattern. The emails on the drive confirm he was targeting me specifically. Richard stared into his wine glass, seeing Sarah's tear-stained face reflected in the burgundy liquid. But she still made her choices. She still participated in planning my destruction. What happens with her now? Nothing. She's out of my house, out of my company, out of my life. Richard spoke with finality, ignoring the hollow feeling the words created. She chose her path. And yet she gave you the evidence against Consolidated against her husband. Ex-husband, presumably. And yes, she did. Richard acknowledged the complexity without fully addressing it. Her motives are her own. After ending the call with Thomas, Richard sat alone in the darkening living room, nursing his wine and confronting the questions he'd been avoiding all day. If Sarah had been manipulated from the beginning, how much responsibility did she bear for her actions? Was her betrayal calculated or coerced? And if James had truly engineered their entire relationship as an acquisition strategy, what did that reveal about Richard's failure to protect his daughter from such predation? Eleanor would have known how to navigate these emotional waters. She would have found a path between justice and mercy, between necessary consequences and potential reconciliation. Without her wisdom, Richard felt lost in territories far more complex than any business negotiation. His phone chimed with a text message. Sarah again. Chen says the evidence is helping. Thank you for using it. I've filed for annulment. Moving back to Chicago for a fresh start. Goodbye, Dad. Richard stared at the message, feeling the finality of that goodbye. Chicago, where she'd attended university, where she'd always said she felt most independent. Far from Minneapolis, from James, from the father who had publicly humiliated her at her own wedding reception. He considered responding, but found no words adequate to the moment. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound either falsely forgiving or unnecessarily cruel? Better to leave it unanswered to let the separation remain clean and complete. By Wednesday afternoon, the situation had evolved dramatically. Victor Harrington had resigned from Consolidated Construction's board citing personal reasons in a terse press release that fooled no one in Minneapolis business circles. The company announced a strategic restructuring of its elder services division, effectively dismantling the operation without admitting wrongdoing. Lawrence Chen called with further updates. The board is in panic mode. 3 families have already filed lawsuits based on our evidence. State regulators have opened an official investigation. Consolidated stock has dropped 17% since Monday. And James? Roberts is cooperating fully with authorities in exchange for immunity. As for James, he appears to have left the state. His credit cards show activity in Nevada as of yesterday. Running back to Las Vegas, Richard observed dryly. Appropriate given his gambling problem. What about the restitution to previous victims? Consolidated's attorneys have reached out about a potential settlement framework. They're desperate to avoid a public trial that would expose their entire operation. Richard nodded, satisfied with the rapid collapse of Harrington's scheme. Good. Keep the pressure on until they meet all our demands. And Sarah, any communication from her? She's moved to Chicago, filed for annulment. Richard kept his voice neutral. Our business is concluded. Wow, Chen paused before responding. You know, Mr. Mason, in my years of practice, I've seen many families fractured by financial disputes. Some breaks are necessary and permanent. Others have potential for repair, given sufficient time and changed circumstances. Are you suggesting I should forgive her betrayal? Richard's tone sharpened. I'm suggesting that humans are complex, relationships evolve, and time often provides perspective unavailable in the immediate aftermath of conflict. Chen's voice remained professionally detached. Merely an observation from experience, nothing more. After ending the call, Richard found himself drawn to Eleanor's garden again. The summer heat had intensified, requiring additional watering for the roses to maintain their vibrant blooms. He tended them methodically, remembering Eleanor's patient instruction years ago. Roses are resilient, she'd told him while demonstrating proper pruning technique. They can withstand harsh conditions, even severe cutting back, and still return stronger the following season. Nature's lesson in recovery and renewal. Richard snipped a fading bloom, considering the metaphor. His relationship with Sarah had been severely cut back, perhaps to the root. Was recovery possible, should it be? Or was the damage too fundamental, the betrayal too complete for any meaningful restoration? The questions had no immediate answers, and Richard didn't force them. Instead, he continued tending the garden. Eleanor had loved finding solace in the simple, necessary work of nurturing living things. Time would reveal what could grow from the current desolation, whether estrangement was permanent or merely a severe seasonal pruning. By Friday, Mason Construction had fully stabilized. The executive team had rallied around Richard's leadership, employees had processed the dramatic events, and clients had received reassurance of the company's continued excellent service. The attempted hostile takeover had ultimately strengthened the organization, bringing the management team closer and clarifying succession planning. Richard reviewed the week's developments with satisfaction as he prepared to leave the office. Consolidated Construction was in disarray, their predatory business model exposed and dismantled. Victor Harrington had not only resigned, but was now facing potential criminal charges based on evidence provided by Roberts and Sarah. James had effectively disappeared, though Nevada authorities were now looking for him in connection with financial fraud allegations. Justice had been served swiftly and comprehensively. Richard had protected what mattered most: his company, his independence, his dignity. Yet something remained unresolved, a persistent emptiness that success against Consolidated couldn't fill. As he drove home, Richard found himself taking a detour past Sarah's former apartment building. She'd moved out days ago, but he slowed as he passed, remembering dropping her off after family dinners, helping her move in 3 years earlier, the life they'd shared before everything collapsed. His phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Margaret's voice came through the speakers. Mr. Mason, I'm sorry to bother you after hours, but Lawrence Chen called with important news. He says a settlement has been reached with Consolidated. Full restitution to all identified victims, complete dismantling of the Elder Services Division, and a confidential but substantial payment to Mason Construction for legal expenses and damages. Excellent work. Thank him for me. We'll discuss details Monday morning. There's one more thing, sir. A letter arrived for you today by courier from Sarah. I've left it on your desk for Monday. Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did you open it? No, sir. It's marked personal and confidential. Thank you, Margaret. Have a good weekend. He ended the call, his mind already wrestling with what Sarah might have written, what final words she felt necessary to send from Chicago. At home, Richard moved through his evening routine mechanically, his thoughts divided between the victory over Consolidated and the unread letter waiting in his office. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish this week. Harrington was finished. Consolidated was in retreat. Mason Construction was secure. Justice had been served. Yet as he stood in Eleanor's garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the roses in golden light, Richard confronted the cost of that justice. His family was fractured, possibly beyond repair. The daughter he'd raised was now a stranger living in another state. The future he'd imagined, grandchildren, family gatherings, a legacy passed through generations, had evaporated in a single day of necessary but devastating revelation. I did what was necessary, Eleanor, he said softly to the garden. I protected what we built together. But I wonder what you would say about the price we paid. The roses offered no answer, but as darkness fell, Richard found himself considering what Monday might bring. Not just the finalized settlement with Consolidated, but Sarah's letter and whatever it might contain. Perhaps nothing could restore what had been broken. Perhaps some betrayals were too fundamental for genuine reconciliation. Or perhaps, like Eleanor's roses, after severe pruning, something new could eventually grow from what appeared irreparably damaged. Not the same relationship as before that was impossible after what had transpired, but something different, tempered by hard experience and clearer understanding of both human weakness and resilience. Richard didn't know. Only time would tell what might be possible. For now, he had protected what mattered most and achieved justice against those who had threatened everything he'd built. Whatever Monday's letter contained, whatever the future held with Sarah Richard Mason, had reminded everyone, family, competitors, the entire Minneapolis business community, exactly who he was: a builder who refused to be dismantled, a businessman who understood value beyond price tags, a man who would fight with every resource to protect his independence and dignity. Some lessons came at terrible cost, but they were learned nonetheless by everyone involved. And in that knowledge, if nothing else, Richard found a measure of peace as he turned from the garden and walked back into his empty house, alone with his victory and its consequences.